Like most graphic applications, Coreal Painter has some basic tools that you can use to manipulate your images. And many of these tools are located right on the toolbars. However, there's some little tricks that you might want to know in order to use them. Now, the first tool that I want to look at here is the dropper tool. And the dropper tool, as you can see, has no properties that we can change. So it's kind of interesting that we have a revert dropper considering there's nothing to revert to. But basically the dropper just allows us to pick a color. Whatever we click on, that's the new color that's chosen. The interesting thing about working with the dropper is, if you're working with the brush tool, if you hold down the Alt key, it automatically changes to the dropper. And this will allow us to sample and then continue painting more or less in an intuitive and seamless way. So just keep your hand near that Alt key and you're going to be able to pick up whatever color is directly under your brush so that you can continue painting with it. And this way you don't even really need to come over here to the dropper tool. Now, if you're using any of the other tools and you want to pick up a color, then yes, you need to use the dropper tool. Now, the paint bucket tool allows you to fill with the current color, or we can fill with a gradient, a source image, or weaves. Now, if we choose gradient, you'll see that we can choose and load from a gradient library, whatever gradient library we currently have active. If we're choosing source image, you'll notice that nothing comes up, and we'll come back to that in a second. And if we choose weaves, we can choose from a weaves library, whatever weaves library we have loaded. If we come over to window, and we come to Media Library Panels and we go to Patterns, you'll find that we have a pattern library. And I'm just going to come over here and I'm going to change the size of this. So we're going to change the library view to large so that you can see what these are. These are basically repeating, seamlessly tileable patterns. And we can make our own patterns and we can work with these patterns using different brushes. This is something that I'll come back to in another painter series. I won't really cover this too much, but right now, you can see that the hens and chicks one is the one that we have by default. So if I were to choose fill with source image, this is what would be filled when I press the paint bucket. Now, of course, right now I don't have an empty selection, but if I did, then that's what would happen. Now, likewise, if we choose weaves, you'll find at the end of this libraries that we have weaves libraries. And you can edit weaves, create new weaves, load weaves, you can work with weaves, but basically the idea of weaves is that they are just meant to mimic woven cloth. And if we go to gradient, the very first one here is our gradients. And again, we can create gradients, edit gradients, and of course we can load our own gradient. By default, the gradient that is going to be working by default is the additional color plus the main color, as you can see here by this 2-point. Now, when we're working with the paint bucket tool, we can choose to use the fill image mode or we can choose the fill cell mode. Fill cell mode basically works the same way that you would want it to work if you were filling an animation cell. And generally speaking, my preference is to choose fill image mode. Now, we can set the tolerance, and this is very closely related to the tolerance of our magic wand tool. We can choose the feather, and of course this is exactly like choosing feather on a selection. It basically blurs out the edge. And then we can choose anti-alias on or off, and of course this is very much like our selection tools. So you can see these are very closely related to our selection tools, and generally speaking, they'll work best when you have a selection. Now next we have the eraser tool. Now the eraser tool works like any brush except the fact that we can choose a soft edge here for our brush or a hard edge for the brush. We can choose a size and an opacity, and we can choose freehand or straight line strokes. Now the idea with the eraser tool is it erases to the paper color. So if I click right now and drag, you'll see that we're erasing to white. Now the reason why is because our current paper color is set to white. If we come up to canvas and we choose set paper color, whatever is the main color will now become the new paper color. And if I erase now, you'll see that now we erase back to the new paper color. So that's an interesting quirk of the eraser tool. Next, we have our dodge and burn tools. Now, if we click and hold down on the dodge tool, you'll see that the burn tool is directly underneath. So basically the idea here with the dodge and burn is that we are going to either lighten or darken our photo. Now I'm going to go ahead and zoom in a few times on this so we can really see some detail. And I'm going to use the space bar. We're going to get near the eyes. Now let's say that I want to lighten part of this. Well, what I would use is I would use this dodge tool. And I can set the size and opacity for this. We want to keep the opacity really low because these are very, very powerful tools. And so I'm just going to go ahead and just lightly kind of scrub in here just to lighten up that eye a little bit and try to get a little bit of detail back in that eye like so. Now let's say that I want to darken. Then I would go ahead and use the burn tool. Let's say I want to darken over here like so, and maybe I want to darken over here as well. So the idea here is that these are manipulation tools that will allow you to darken or lighten photographic or painterly elements. It's meant to mimic what you would have done in a photographic darkroom back in the days when people used to actually expose real film in darkrooms. Very few people do that anymore, but the concepts remain the same. We're lightening or darkening our photographic elements and manipulating them using our dodge and burn tools. Now, these resaturation and bleed values, I don't know why they come up here, because as soon as you click and hold down, you'll see that the only one that matters is the jitter. So the idea with the jitter is that it introduces a certain amount of shake, random shake in the brush. I don't really find that to be terribly useful with these brushes. However, you can play with that if you want. And that basically covers our most fundamental image manipulation tools. So now we'll begin to look at some of the more advanced image manipulation tools.